Hello, Debt Warriors, and welcome back to another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. I'm your host, Katie O'Shea. The world of higher education is evolving quickly, from the cost of college to what students can expect after graduation. Whether you're a prospective student or supporting one, understanding this new landscape is key to making informed and financially smart decisions. To help us navigate the changing realities of college, I'm joined by Dr. Alaina Harper. Dr. Alaina is the executive director at OneGoal, a powerful program that begins in high school and continues with post-secondary support through a student's first year of college. In this episode, Dr. Alaina and I will dive into the recent changes of the FAFSA, new scholarship and grant opportunities, the growing popularity of online education, and so much more. Now, let's jump into my conversation with Dr. Alaina. Hi, Dr. Alaina. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm looking forward to having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, Katie.
Today, we're going to be talking about how we can navigate the new college realities. So to get started, how has the cost of college changed over the past decade and what factors are driving these changes?
Man, this is such an important topic for the work that I'm doing and for me to be thinking about. And I'm so excited to be here with you and your folks thinking about these topics. I think the biggest thing about how the cost of college has changed is that it continues to balloon. It continues to grow way faster than inflation. It continues to grow faster than the income of most families. And that's especially true for students who come from low-income households. In addition to the cost ballooning, we also know there have been reductions in state funding or for public colleges, and that there's been rising administrative costs in colleges and universities because, and often they're putting more money into like amenities and services to make themselves more attractive, but that is coming at a cost to students. So those costs are ballooning.
Right. So what about the changes in financial aid over the last recent years?
You know, financial aid policy has been moving rapidly, I would say, and there have been important shifts. We don't always give credence to some of those promising shifts that have been happening, but there's some promising work. And of course, there's lots of challenging work and lots of progress to be made. I'll start with the positive because that's how I always like to begin, which is there have been lots of efforts to simplify FAFSA, which is what makes what determines your eligibility for federal financial aid. They have done lots of work to expand Pell Grant eligibility. We've seen over the last few years debt forgiveness increase, and there's been some increased aid from states. I think that, just like on this podcast, what we're talking about with Saving for College, there's just so much more awareness and conversation around the financial barriers for students to access post-secondary work after they graduate from high school. OneGoal is a member of an organization called National College Attainment Network. We call it NCAN for short. And so NCAN is a consortium, and alongside with OneGoal, we've been advocating for these changes for years. But even with all that work, even with all the people involved, there's so much more progress that still needs to be made because it's still out of reach. It's still out of reach for most students coming from low income households and also middle income households. And I think, given that it's in the middle, it's important to know that it's actually multiple groups who are being impacted at this time. And because of that awareness, students in both of those, coming from both of those income levels are much less interested in taking on debt in the form of student loans. And so because of that, and because we don't want them to have to do that, we can't just sort of accept the status quo or the worst or go backwards with policies that can negatively impact the future of the Pell Grant or the public service loan forgiveness programs and other federal initiatives that have made pursuing post-secondary education really possible for many, many more students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just wanted to say, I will definitely put the link to NCAN in the description of this podcast and a link to OneGoal, of course. I'll put that there. I want to talk about the FAFSA. You touched on it. You said they've simplified the process. So I'm wondering, are there any other changes to that? And what do parents and students need to know about the new process?
This is really important. If you haven't started filling out your FAFSA and you're eligible, you should do that now. I'll say that again at the end of this, at the end of this answer. But what I'll say is, here in 2024, FAFSA underwent its most significant overhaul to date, and that is because they basically have changed how students are considered eligible for the amount of financial aid that they will receive. So now, an aid for an individual is received based on a new calculation called the Student Aid Index. And that's a need based analysis that takes into account several factors. And that new student aid index has replaced what people would have historically known as the expected family contribution formulation. And that is a really big change because need is more at the center of this current need. And so it might indicate that a student with a negative aid index could be eligible for higher financial aid or more financial aid to support their post-secondary work. I think I would just say that it's really important to start the FAFSA process early because sometimes people have questions. Sometimes there are little glitches. And so you want to make sure you have enough time to navigate it. So if you haven't started it, do now. Go to studentaid.gov and get started. FAFSA is important. And for as many people as who feel comfortable, you should try to access that financial aid.
And should everyone apply regardless of if their income?
Regardless of your income, you should still apply because your student aid index will help you determine and also help you be able to sort of predict and project what your financial aid eligibility might be.
Are there new scholarship opportunities or grant programs that students should be aware of?
Yes, man, this is like one of the most important things and why advising in high school is so critical because there are local, state, and honestly career specific, like pathway driven scholarships popping up all the time. Another thing that a lot of states have right now, they're offering what are called last dollar scholarships or scholarships that cover a balance after your Pell Grant eligibility. Kicker of this is that most students don't know about these. They're a lot. They're hard to sort of navigate and access. And so if you need help sort of figuring out, maneuvering that process, because applying to everything that you're eligible for or like making sure that you can take advantage of those opportunities is the most important part. Access, which is the thing that we've always talked about, we're always figuring out like get students more access, but access is only as good as your ability to navigate it. And so part of the reason advising like OneGoal is so important is because we're helping students put their fingers on and like pull together that list of resources and opportunities that might be helpful for them in terms of limiting the personal loans that they might need for post-secondary education.
Right. I do think a lot of people a lot of the kids, they don't know about grants and scholarships. I feel like I barely knew when I applied to colleges.
There's also like a lot of work that it's also a lot of work. And so sometimes I think students get overwhelmed in the process of like, it's a different application process for this scholarship and this scholarship. And maybe they're not huge scholarships, but they're free money versus taking out a loan, which might be, not free money.
What are some of the biggest mistakes students make when taking out loans for college? Because I always like to talk about this because it's so crazy. At 18, you can take out these loans and you might not know how it's going to affect you in 10 years.
We wish it was 10 years. Often it's not. And I'll just start there, Katie, that is often the biggest mistake students make, which is they borrow the money but they don't understand what repayment is going to look like. So in some cases, repayment starts like the day after you graduate. And in others, there's like a longer timeline. So you really have to be paying attention to those terms. I think because students are not always they're thinking, this is how much I borrowed, but they're not thinking about the interest that is accruing on that borrowed money. And so they underestimate the impact of interest and how what they borrowed actually turns into a different sum that they are responsible for repaying. And to that end, then sometimes they take out more than what they truly need. To just circle back, because this is something I really care deeply about, I would say The other biggest mistake is to think loans are the first stop option, and they shouldn't be. You really should, impress upon anyone that you're talking with, and I try to do this all the time, that the biggest mistake you can make is not exploring free money options, grants, scholarships, work study, do all of those things, taking on a job that might, develop your skills for just a few hours, not overwhelming yourself, but just a little bit before you turn to loans. And then I think, okay, once you do that, then the other biggest mistake might be, if it's not sort of the tactical, this is how the money adds up. I think the other mistake that people can make is they don't actually know how what they're studying, how what they're going to be pursuing connects to an actual career pathway. So they end up studying something that they might be interested in, but have no idea what the careers are that are associated with that. How often students who major in that or who study that get placed in jobs, what is the average salary of those jobs, the types of research you might do when you're thinking about a pathway between interest and future.
I think you made a great point too about thinking about the interest and such, because when you're applying for loans, you say, "Oh, I need to make this minimum payment every month." But that's really, the minimum is not really going to make a big dent with the interest in anything, and they don't think of that.
I think like there are lots of mistakes that students can make, but all of those mistakes are things that people in their lives have likely, probably, or people they have access to, or places like this podcast can help them avoid those pitfalls. Like the great thing about those mistakes is that they're all avoidable, and quite easily avoidable. So I think that's the like glimmer that I would add to that question.
What are some strategies for minimizing student loan debt while pursuing your higher education? You talked about, work study and everything. I think that's a great point to bring up.
The first is sort of like, it seems like a non answer, but it's one of the most critical answers, which is you have to apply to a wide range of institutions. You have to, like, different types, different sizes, different amounts of money available at those institutions, and then compare your award letters very carefully. OneGoal has a tool, it's called decided.org, like, decide ed org. And award letters can be really hard to make sense of. And that tool helps students upload their award letters and get a breakdown of like, out of these letters, which might be the best option. So applying to a wide range of institutions is really important because you're likely to get different aid across that variety. I think don't overlook community colleges, max out on that free money as we've been talking about, like thinking about how those schools and programs morph into the career path that you want is really important. Again, I said work study, but also like maybe you're not eligible for work study, but you could make it, get a job that build skills, right? Build skills and resume, and also helps to offset. Again, I would say think about a few hours a week, maybe not overwhelming yourself because you also want to be successful in your academic or programmatic endeavors. And then I think the other piece is, and this one is really hard for folks, which is choosing a less expensive school doesn't necessarily mean that you're settling. And I think we are always thinking that if it's more expensive, it's better, but that might not be true. You might just be being really strategic in terms of setting yourself up for the best future possible.
What financial planning tips would you give students and families preparing for college expenses?
I think financial planning is a component of how you are planning and preparing for sort of like college and your future. And at OneGoal, we talk about that as like there's a framework, a multi-pronged framework that will help you choose the best path. And financial planning and financial fit is one component of what makes the best fit for you. I think the other components are, is it the right academic fit? Are you likely to be successful in that place? Is it the right personal fit? Meaning it has the atmosphere, the components, the things that you're looking for? And are there completion supports or opportunities to get additional support once you get to a place? Because people often underestimate the like impact of a transition of this magnitude as they move from being in high school, a very sort of like structured environment, to being in college, a very, a much less structured environment. So those sort of programmatic supports once they make that transition help. And so for completion supports, they're thinking about like graduation rates. Does the institution support you with like academically, socially, emotionally, financially, like all of those things, kind of like counseling and, and all of those pieces. For the academic match, like, again, if you plan financially perfectly, but you go to a place where you're not likely to be academically successful, you're either going to have to start again or you're going to have to pay again in order to redo those things. So, academic match helps you with the right financial fit and sort of like what matters most to you. Again, that helps you because if you start and stop and move and transfer and do all of these things, then again, you're going to have to be thinking about financially differently. But for many, like the actual financial fit is where people put most, sort of like most of their, I don't know, marbles in that basket or however they say. And that's when you're going to have like the money talk with yourself. You're going to have the money talk with your family. And you'll basically need to be able to answer like, can I afford this institution, not just today, but into the future for the entirety of the time I'm likely to be here? And is that the right choice for me and my family? I think when you start thinking about all of those components and how they relate to the financial fit, then you get into a pathway that's best suited not only from a financial perspective, but also helps set you up to be sort of like on a nice trajectory towards the like type of future that you want for yourself. I mean, I think I would just say about that sort of framework, those four components, that we find when students are doing that, like our own outcomes at OneGoal say they're 47% more likely to persist in those programs, meaning go back after the first year, go back after the second year if it's a multi-year program. And they're like 40% more likely to actually complete that program because there are so many students who start and then they stop because they can't afford it or it's not the right fit in one of those ways. And so they don't get to your point of like when you're going for a job, people are often just looking like, did you complete this? Do you have the certificate, the credential, the degree that says you're ready to take on this next role? And so if you're not able to persist and complete, then I think you set yourself up for not being as successful in the future. And so thinking about financial fit as a way to integrate those pieces is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. So after all of this talk about, like how much college costs and everything, do you believe that the traditional four-year degrees are still worth the investment, or are alternative education paths becoming more viable?
I think, this is like a long standing debate. And I think like that the answer is truly, it depends. I think if we redefine success to be making sure that you have the type of future that you want, then the answer is actually a little bit clearer because a bachelor's degree is one pathway to get there, but it's not the only pathway to get there, right? And so for many careers, for many roles and futures, a four-year degree is still the clearest path to that kind of upward mobility, which is often what people are thinking about when they're talking about accessing and completing college. They want that sort of upward economic and social mobility that comes along with that. But when it comes to helping students figure out the right pathway for them, there's no one size fits all option. Whether or not it's worth it really depends on what it is you're trying to do and the quality of the program and its fit for you in terms of if it helps you access that. Because if you go to, a school and then you have to switch schools four times, and so it takes you 8 years to finish instead of four, maybe that wasn't the right pathway for you. So you kind of have to figure it out based on what you want to do, which is why we start with career aspirations at the center when, we're doing our work at OneGoal.
Yeah, because that makes sense. Because then, yeah, what if you decide, oh, I want to change my whole major, I want to change what I'm doing, I have to switch and then basically start over again. And
I mean, I thought when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a medical doctor, and now I'm a whole different kind of doctor. So I totally get that part of it.
how is the rise of online education and community college shaping the future of higher education? You touched on community college a little bit. I want to kind of get into that.
Yes, I think that it has been the biggest area of learning for me in my experience in helping folks navigate post secondary pathways, which is that online education and community college are reshaping the landscape in profound ways. I think especially for students who are working professionally, especially, excuse me, for students who are parenting or caregiving, there is a flexibility that comes with online and community college education that is not there in some of the traditional programs. At the same time, if it's not done well, there are lots of risks that come with persistence and completion. Community colleges are incredibly promising in terms of accessibility, but they're underfunded and honestly overlooked in a lot of the policy conversations where we started. And so sometimes, the funding or the completion in those programs isn't what we hope it would be. I think the future is going to be more of a hybrid approach, a more flexible, and hopefully more student centered approach, because we know we have students who are looking for post secondary pathways who have a lot of different sort of needs and in terms of flexibility, access, and the ability to kind of be in one place for an extended period of time.
So yeah, it's like a degree from an online education or community college is kind of looked at differently than your traditional 4-year college.
Again, I think the answer to that, Katie, is like it depends. And often, a lot, particularly when you're thinking about community colleges, when you are thinking about those degrees, a lot of them end in associate's degrees, which sometimes students transition into 4-year schools to eventually earn their bachelor's degree. And there are lots of careers where an associate's degree is what you need in order to access that thing. So putting the student at the center, making sure that their career aspirations, and they know for this thing I want to do, this is the type of degree that helps get me there. And this is like a viable pathway, is going to be the way to figure out whether or not, that online school, that community college, or that, traditional 4-year school might be the best way.
Yeah, and I think going back to the financial side of it, if you were to start off in community for 2 years and then you're determined to go somewhere else for another 2, that could also help save a little money.
For sure. I think that, like, again, the big thing to be focused on in that pathway process that you just mentioned is when you go to that 2-year school, making sure you're having the right fit so that you actually persist, you actually complete, and you actually can make that transition. And so, again, what are your aspirations? What's at the center? And how are those 4 pieces all going together? The academic fit, the financial fit, the personal fit, and whether or not they have those supports, and you're looking for those completion supports and those graduation rates to help you make those choices.
Right. So once the students will figure out their aspirations for colleges, what role does the job market play in influencing students' decisions on whether to pursue higher education? I also want to say, like, there could be such a shift in the job market too for when they apply to when they actually graduate. So it's kind of even hard to determine, I guess.
You hit the nail on the head, which is that there are probably jobs that'll be around in the future that we haven't even thought of yet,
Right.
because technology, infrastructure, AI, things are changing so rapidly. I would just say that the research says that by 2030, about 60% of jobs will require a degree or credential. And it's important to know that it's both, right? It's a degree or a credential. So the job market is a huge consideration. Everyone is always asking me, like, what's OneGoal's one goal? Like, can you say what the one goal is? And my usual answer to that is our one goal is whatever our students want for themselves individually. Like, we want what they want for themselves. But the, like, North Star, the thing we're always pointing towards is making sure that our students, in whatever pathway they choose, they're moving towards a family sustaining career that's fulfilling, that's life affirming, that gives them the choices and the opportunities that they want. We have to continue to foster an ecosystem where education and employment are, like, better aligned. So I think the job market plays a huge role so that students don't have to choose between making a living and building a future, right? Like, we should be making sure that post-secondary pathways help students ultimately to make a living and build a future that they want. And so if we start with equipping them with better, more frequent advising to in that sort of application process, as you were talking about, and build that into the high school experience, then I think it's like, well, I know what I want for myself. I know who I am. I know that this pathway is one way to get there. And because I'm already aligned, I might find other avenues that will help me get there even sooner, even quicker, even more financially, viable options, because I am moving all of my pieces towards what I want for myself and my life and my future. And that's really like the one goal I have for all the students we work with. It's the one goal I have for the folks who are listening to this podcast. It's the one goal that I would have for anyone, which is like, make sure you're doing something and you're on a pathway and you're making choices every day that help you get to where you want to be the best version of yourself.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about OneGoal, or let my listeners know about it? Of course, I'm going to link in the description of this podcast, but is there anything else you want to say?
I would just say that, like, remember that you are at the center. Knowing yourself is the most important, making sure that you are really confident in who you are and that you're exploring that and exploring the options, because whatever choices you're going to make for post-secondary, or whatever advice you're going to give to someone who who is exploring a post-secondary pathway, has to be truly something that matters to them, so that they get on a pathway that leads them to the future that they want. And as long as we're starting there with the like individual student or the individual young person in mind, then we're going to create a better future for all of us.
Well, Dr. Alaina, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, listeners.
Thank you. Navigating the financial side of college has always been a challenge, and with constant changes, it's more important than ever to stay informed. One thing that hasn't changed, you still need to fill out the FAFSA, no matter your income level. Submitting your application early can help ensure you don't miss out on financial aid opportunities. Be sure to apply to a range of schools so you can compare offers and make the best financial decision for your future. It's also helpful to have a sense of your career goals before you start. Knowing your aspirations can help you stay on track and potentially graduate sooner, saving both time and money. But remember, the job market is always evolving, and it's okay to change your path along the way. And with that being said, that wraps up another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you're tuning in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us. I'll talk to you next time, Millennials, Gen Z, and everyone else tuning in. Bye.